One of the earliest actions of this government, which was cheered on by the business movement, the union movement and the media collectively, was this moment. It was the moment when the government decided to sign up to 43% reduction in emissions by 2030, but more importantly, to get us to more than 80% of the country to be powered by renewable energy. Now, all of this, of course, is costing trillions of dollars to move from the system that worked to the one that they, fingers crossed, hope will work into the future. And the reality is that you need to build this infrastructure, and that's what's costing billions of dollars, trillions of dollars with other infrastructure, and that's why you're paying more when it comes to your bills, because someone has to pay for it. Well, the sting in the tail on all of this is that, as we know, we're about to head into a particularly hot summer after we've been through a couple of wet summers. Now, we know that will include bushfires, but what it also means is that, according to the Bureau of Meteorology, when it's hotter, there's less wind. Can you see a potential problem here when part of the electricity solution is a wind farm?
We're likely to see less wind in the same parts of the country where a lot of electricity generation and transmission occurs. And obviously, from a wind generation point of view, particularly in southern parts of Australia, we're likely to see decreased wind there, which will impact on the amount of wind activity that can come into the grid.
Now, he can mumble it and look down and hope that nobody was rolling a tape. We work, we look, we'll play it as often as we can. The reality is that as climate change does make the extremes hotter and colder and wetter and drier, if one of the solutions to our energy mix is something that requires the wind to blow, when it's going to be particularly hot, there's not going to be the wind. Which is why we heard today from, yet again, the people who oversee this multi-trillion-dollar transition, so the Prime Minister can look good when he bids for a UN climate conference in a couple of years' time. This bloke knows how to spend your money. $450 million on The Voice. How much money for UN officials to come here and tell us we're still not doing enough because we live in the first world? And we should send money to developing countries like China that continue to be the root cause of more than half of all of the CO2 pollution in the air every year? Well, again, let's turn to the taxpayer-funded version for the best possible spin on this story. This year's summer forecast for a hot and dry El Nino conditions increase the risk of bushfires and extreme heat, which could see electricity reach a 1 in 10 year high demand in the eastern states and in Western Australia. Since last summer, the network's bolstered somewhat by the addition of new batteries and wind and solar projects, which will help navigate reliability pressures, but there's still a risk of load shedding or rolling blackouts, where high demand coincides with scheduled maintenance at power plants or low solar and wind days. They have bet the farm on covering the farm with technology that is utterly dependent on the weather while the weather becomes more volatile. Yet China continues to win. They can pollute however much they want till 2030, and that's when they start to get measured. Their net zero isn't 2050, it's 2060. Yet we cover good agricultural land with solar panels that are often made back in China by slave labour. And if it's not a solar farm, it'll be a wind farm, and depending on the weather, that will determine whether the electricity system works. While we tip in more people with more demand, and the vicious cycle continues. Oh, but it's okay. The front end of the plane's all right. The CEOs are fine. The lobbyists are fine. The media's fine. But you have an anxious wait about whether or not you can even afford to turn on your air conditioner, let alone when you actually need it.